listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. And it's time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. So how you doing today, Rod? Checking in?
I'm doing well.
How's the weather where you are? How's the weather in your undisclosed location on the East Coast somewhere?
It's raining.
Okay, but I've heard, I talked to my friend Kelly down in Texas, and she said it is miserable there. I've heard that from other people in Texas as well. You know what show I did earlier today is I did Carter Laren and Carrie Smith's. They have a show called Coffee Break, which was fun to do. And I talked about Ukraine and stuff, but Carrie's down in Texas, and I guess it's been chilly down there. Too. Miserable. Not as miserable as last year. Remember when it was like a disaster and Ted Cruz went to Mexico? Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that when it froze. The power, I guess the power lines, froze, and then people were out of power for I think like over a week, right?
We had that up here at one point in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I was not here, but it was like 12 years ago. They had ice storms. And but the weather's not so bad in Texas right now that Ted Cruz has had to leave. So he can stay in the country. It's okay as far as things go. But that's the weather around the nation. We've got a great show today. So far, it's off to a great start at least. In the first hour, we got Tim Canova. We haven't talked to Tim in a while. Former candidate who was kind of hosed over by the Democratic Party. I want to talk to him about a lot of things going on in the headlines, as well as Democratic politics in general, and whether he's completely given up on them. I hope to God he has. Because you know who he was hosed by, not literally, but figuratively, was Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Remember that?
Yeah, Miss Ramen Noodle Hair, yeah.
Is that her name?
No, that's the meme. You know, they compare her hair to ramen noodles because of just how she styles it.
Because we were talking to Minal Chan, and it's the year of the tiger. It could be, her name in Chinese could be ramen noodle hair. It's possible. And that would be appropriate because the Olympics are kicking off, and Vladimir Putin landed. He's now in China. You saw that? Vladimir Putin's over there.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, there was a clip of Ukraine being introduced, and he was sleeping during that time.
That's great. That's Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is a master of the border ready to troll Ukraine. Because that's what that is, right? That's trolling him, don't you think?
No, I believe so. I think he did it on purpose, knowing the cameras are going to be on him.
Right. It showed him, because here's the thing. Ukraine, I'm going to tell Ukraine something. And by the way, do we know who's on the second hour? Yeah.
We got Carmine coming in with a little bit of breaking news for you.
Wait, what's the breaking news?
He didn't tell me, so he's going to tell us.
Okay. So we got the great Carmine Sabia joining us in the second hour, as well as today's guest host, Mark Frost. And we got apparently breaking news with Carmine. I wonder what it could be. I don't like the tension. I'm not one of those people who, now let me ask you this, Rod. Let me just say the name of the show. So I'm not asking you this over music. It's The Backstory. Are you saying Mark is on? Saul?
Mark is on.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I was in a meeting all day with bankers.
Was that as fun as it sounds?
No. Have you ever been to one of those meetings where everything that needs to be said is said in a half hour, but the meeting can't end until everybody says it?
Most meetings I've been in, I've never been in one with bankers, thank God. But most meetings I've been in suffer from that exact problem, which at a certain point, once you start texting people next to you saying, why are we having this meeting? Do you know what I'm saying?
I'll tell you the worst is Indonesia because it's so relationship centric. It's not like doing business with the Germans or Americans where you shake hands and get right down to business. In Indonesia, it might take an entire day just to talk about your family and food and this and that before you even get to the reason you got on a 20-hour flight.
So I went to the first time I went to Amsterdam, I noticed that they had different food, which makes sense since the Dutch colonized different countries than the U.S. and Great Britain. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. There's a huge Dutch influence in Indonesia.
I was going to say, here in America, it's hard to find an Indonesian restaurant. But Thai restaurants, let's say, are everywhere, or Chinese restaurants, because there's a lot of colonization, of course, by Great Britain and the U.S., so that translated. But I realized very quickly, I noticed it with steakhouses, too. The steakhouses were different. I forget what it is in the Netherlands. But I noticed Indonesian restaurants everywhere. So I'd never eaten Indonesian. And one of the things that people out there, I assume I'm not the only one, if people have never eaten Indonesian and you know a lot about Indonesia, you said you're an expert on it, it's like 8 million little tiny dishes, right?
I wouldn't say that. It's really, they have a staple. Usually there's always going to be some kind of a rice dish, and it depends on whether it's breakfast, kind of lunch, or dinner. But no, I wouldn't say lots of little dishes. It's usually a main course, which involves something to do with rice, and then there'll be some vegetables and stuff like that on the side. Almost always there'll be some nasi goreng, something of that nature.
I must have hit the wrong places because I went like a couple places. The other thing I had over, I'll tell you in a second, everyone's going to lose their lunch, was when I ordered horse. But,
oh, yeah, I've eaten horse, and I ate that in America.
Okay, so I was renting an apartment in the Noordermarkt area of Amsterdam, and there was a deli down the street, where like a butcher shop, and one of the things they had in their window there was horse. And I figured when in Rome, so to speak. But the Indonesian places I went to, I had a lot of little like cups of things.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Those are condiments. Yeah, you'll get some sambal, you'll get some sauces. So, yeah, there'll be a lot of little tiny, like, Dixie cup type things of condiments that are...
That's exactly right. And there wasn't like 3 of them. There was like 37 of them. There was a lot of them, of these condiments.
Yeah.
Does that make sense
Indonesian
now?
Food.
So now you don't think I'm delusional. You understand what I'm talking about.
I don't, but what's the nastiest food you've ever eaten, would you say? Meaning, unless you had to, you would never eat it again.
Well, I'll tell you, and I'll tell you the food I didn't eat. And I'm not one of those people, believe it or not, Mark, I'm a positive person. It may be hard to believe, but I'm actually I don't like negativity. Does that make sense? So
Sure.
I don't really like to focus on things I don't like. But the worst food I had was some meatloaf at one of my hospital stays last year. I made the mistake. And I'll tell you what I did not eat is jail food. So, for instance, when I was arrested in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I was one of 5 reporters arrested down there. And I was at the parish prison outside Baton Rouge. I decided, because here's what happened. I got arrested, and I knew I'd be out within, let's say, 24 hours at most. Does that make sense? I knew I had to go through processing and everything, but it was really just like, it wasn't like Assange. They didn't carry me away in the middle of the night or anything. I was arrested out covering the protests, and I wasn't the only one. So I said, I'll be here 24 hours. And I decided to go on a hunger strike, not Dick Gregory style, but just, I decided I didn't want to eat prison food. It just didn't sound good to me. Because also there's a lot of really good food. Louisiana is one of my favorite food states. And there's a place, the Spanish Market down in Baton Rouge, I used to get sandwiches at every day. Very good food when I was working on a campaign down there.
Let me tell you why I asked. I won't mention the company, but the head salesperson of a very large banking conglomerate contacted me several years ago and wanted to know if I would give him the secret of how I conquered the market for the largest Muslim nation in the world. Because it's very hard to penetrate Indonesia. And I had every single bank as a customer in the entire country. There wasn't one bank that didn't use my software. Wow. And so I told him the answer, and he didn't believe me. And I was dead serious. So he asked, Mark, how did you penetrate that market, and how not only did you penetrate it, but nobody else can come in after you and take it away? And I answered him, I go, because I ate their food. I ate anything they put in front of me. And that changed the whole game. The entire relationship changed when I ate their food. And it's something Americans don't grasp quite often, how important food is within a particular culture. And Indonesians are very proud of their food. And they don't really expect people to like everything, because even Indonesians don't like everything, but they kind of are offended by the typical American who turns their nose up at anything that's not a Big Mac. And I ate their food. I ate lung. I ate bat. I ate all sorts of stuff.
And you're saying some of it was not.
And then that translated into relationships. And then people started inviting me not out to restaurants, but into their home. And I'd meet their family, would get to know each other personally. And the other companies never had a chance. It was really that simple.
But
nothing genius about that. I just ate their food.
But some of the food you're saying was awful. Is that what you're saying?
Bat was not my thing, but I ate it.
Well, so what was bat like? Explain. If you had don't say it like chicken.
I won't. Have you ever had squirrel?
No, I've not.
Okay. Have you ever had anything gamey at all, like maybe a deer?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Take the gamiest food you've eaten and soak it in something really vinegary for, say, overnight. Soak it in vinegar overnight and let it age a couple days. And that's how bat was. It was exceptionally acidic with a vinegary taste. And it's probably why they had a kind of a hot, spicy sauce that they served it with. But it wasn't awful. It was just so incredibly, it was a meat that tasted very, very strange to me. And so, you know, anything you're not used to usually doesn't taste good. And, but I ate it, and then I ate it again because I made the mistake of acting like I liked it more than I did. And so when I went back again the next year, they made sure to take me to a place that had good bat.
see, life's too short. I don't mind eating. There's a certain, and I've even talked about this. My son Shane, who used to be the co-host of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan when he was on, now it's Thomas and Pelly. But Shane, when we lived in L.A., we lived in L.A. for a long time. I love L.A. taco carts, and I don't say this because I'm bragging about it. Shane was cooler than I was because he would eat like lengua, for instance.
Yeah.
Tongue.
Yeah.
And
tongue is not good.
That's what he said. I just can't do it. And I'm not saying like I'm proud of it, like, oh, I would never eat. I just can't do it. It would make me puke. Just even thinking about it, I don't like the idea. And so things like lengua or tripas or sesos or some of that stuff that they have at the taco carts, brains, cabeza, head, stuff like that, not into it. And again, I don't say that Pride. In fact, I've mentioned this on the air, but I'm kind of long-term thinking about going on a European vacation. What I think I'm going to do, I've sort of figured it out, Mark, sort of. Because I was trying to figure out where to go. And I think I'm going to go to Berlin for a week because I've never spent time in Berlin. One of the great things about this job is I could do the show from over there. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I wouldn't have to stop doing the show. I could go over there. Berlin would be good. Also, I could see Peter Oliver. That'd be fun. That's one reason I like to do it there. But in the middle of that week, I might fly to Amsterdam. And so
I know why you want to go to Amsterdam.
Well, there's a few reasons, but I like Amsterdam in general. I've spent, like I say, I had a flat there that I rented one of the last times I did training in Amsterdam. And Amsterdam also had the best mushrooms I've ever had. If we're talking about drugs.
So you're talking about the psilocybin mushrooms?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
They were when I've had psilocybin mushrooms before, and it's been like 20 years in Amsterdam was the last time I had them.
Did you have them dry or wet?
They were wet. And previously to that, when I'd have them at Grateful Dead concerts or something like that, the mushrooms always tasted like the bottom of a box of popcorn. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I always made Orange Julius's.
So what I did was I took the mushrooms and I watched Jamiroquai videos on Dutch MTV. By the way, I can say this, and I'm one of the few, I believe I'm the only host on Radio Sputnik who can say this, that I've directed a video that's played on MTV Amsterdam, Netherlands, the Dutch version of MTV.
Well, the Dutch version's better. I've actually seen a little bit of international MTV, and they're much more prog rockish.
Well, this was not. I directed a video for MC Micro G, and people don't know who MC Micro G is here, but in the Netherlands, he's on one of those. Like everyone knows who MC Micro G is. They know him from a song "Holiday." I didn't direct that one. I directed the video for "Show 'Em the Bass," which is a lesser hit of MC Micro G's. But still, I directed that video and edited it and did everything on it. And it's an embarrassing early 90s video, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Using the video effects that you would expect in an early 90s video. But I did it, and much to my amazement, apparently, it played a number of times on MTV, the Dutch, I would say MTV Netherlands, except that doesn't flow trippingly from the tongue. So I like Amsterdam. And the thing about Europe is, you know this, once you get over there, like if I'm in Berlin, me going to Amsterdam is trivial. You know what I'm saying?
Of course, yeah. It's a hop and a skip.
That's right. And it's a whole different country. And I may go to, last time I was out there, this is why when I was out there to cover in Helsinki, the Trump-Putin summit, I also went to Budapest because I'd never been to an Eastern European country. And part of me would like to go to an Eastern European country. I'd like to visit Poland someday. But a friend of mine said, if they find out you work for Sputnik in Poland, they'll beat you up.
Really?
Yes. So I said, that doesn't sound fun to me. Especially as a place to... Well, let me say this about Germany, though. Germany just canceled, did you hear this? The German version of RT. They banned it in Germany.
Oh, really?
Yes. They just banned the German version of RT. And so Russia banned Deutsche Welle, the German network, from the Duma. So there's a little bit of tit for tat going on there. And it's interesting to me because I don't know what Germany's thinking. Do you think that the people in Germany won't be able to figure out how to listen to RT Germany? They're not, in other words, they can't ban RT from broadcasting in the German language. They just can't do it from Germany now. Or
right.
be broadcast
and, yeah,
on
you're
cable
exactly
in
right.
Germany.
You're exactly right, and I'll tell you how I know that. I've told you about that trip I took from London to Singapore. I went through Eastern Europe, Germany, Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, went east, went through Mongolia, all that kind of stuff. Well, everybody I met, and I mean everybody, in every country I went to, they could have a $50 computer, and they had a VPN on it. Everybody had a VPN. Everybody. Literally everybody. It could be a village hut with a one electrical cord hanging down from the ceiling, and their laptop would be plugged into it, and there'd be a VPN installed on their laptop.
Explain what a VPN is, since people aren't in a European village. And a lot of people actually don't know what it is. But explain to people what that is, Mark.
Sure. What it does is it allows you to operate around the web without your internet service provider being part of it. They just provide the juice and that's it, but all identity is scrubbed out of you. It's called a virtual private network. So for instance, let's take something simple like Netflix. Everybody knows what Netflix is. Well, Netflix is different in every country. So if you're in the UK and you want to watch something that's not on Netflix UK, you just turn on your VPN and you go to Netflix US, and it works. So a VPN prevents the government from listening to you, that sort of a thing. And if you're smart and choose a good one and you have a good encryption key, even the NSA will have a hard time tracking what you're doing and where you're going, because it basically strips out all the location and identification information that's involved in the TCP IP stacks that are exchanged when you do anything on the web or you do anything on the internet. So it's an extra layer of protection, and literally you can be a poor person in Asia that makes $1,000 a year and you have a hand-me-down laptop, you'll have a VPN on it.
Yeah, and by the way, I have a couple of these Raspberry Pi computers that are very small, very cheap, under $100 computers that can be used for stuff like that as well. And that's one of the reasons I have them, because they'll fit in your pocket. And they allow ways around. You know, I was just on Alex Jones's show on Monday, and do you know one of the things he's doing? He's selling DVDs of some of his films. His films about Bohemian Grove and the Skull and Bone Society at Yale. He's giving them away to people. He's selling them on DVD. And he pointed this out. He said, why am I selling DVDs? He said, because even though it's old school technology, they can't censor it. And he's telling people, get the DVDs from me, make a digital copy and give it to whoever you want to. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I think it's very smart of Alex. Now, let me ask you this from an economics perspective, Mark. And one of the reasons I think what Germany's doing is going to absolutely backfire. Is there any term but it's true, it's human nature. This could be more psychology than economics, although there seems to be some overlap a lot of the time. For the phenomenon of people want something they can't have. If you ban something, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
It makes a lot of people want it more. Now, I know it's a supply and demand issue for pricing, but psychologically, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I was going to say, there's actually a psychological concept named after that, and it's called the yellow balloons phenomena. So, Lee, do not think about the yellow balloons on your ceiling right now. Do not do that. I command you, do not think of the yellow balloons on your ceiling. What are you doing right now? You're looking up at the ceiling. Are there any yellow balloons up there? So as soon as you prohibit something, the second you prohibit it, the utility of consuming it for many, if not most personalities, just increases. And if the utility for consuming it increases, the demand for it increases.
Right. And it's a weird thing. And by the way, we could get into the psychology of Hunter Biden all day. And I think this, and I'm really being 100% serious now. I think part of what appeals to Hunter Biden about crack whores, aside from the two obvious things, which is the crack and the whores, aside from that, the idea that he's Hunter Biden, he knows who he is. He's doing something very forbidden. Does that make sense?
Of course.
And I think that's part of the turn-on for him, aside from the crack and the whore part, which, again, is sufficient. But because I'll tell you who else I know for sure, Anthony Weiner. I interviewed a woman named Sydney Leathers, who was one of the people who had an affair with Anthony Weiner. And I'd wanted to interview one of the women he was involved with because I knew a lot about that story. I worked on it with Andrew Breitbart and so on. And when I interviewed Sydney, I asked her, I said, because I had a guess, and I said, do you think Anthony Weiner got off on the fact that you knew you were talking to Anthony Weiner? And she said, absolutely. And because that's what I guessed, based on stuff I'd read about him and knew about him indirectly. And she said he once asked as foreplay. Now get this. See, a lot of politicians wouldn't want who they're talking to know who they are because they'd be afraid. So they'd want to remain anonymous. You see what I'm saying? But not Weiner. There's something going on with him where he wants the person to know who they're talking to. And she said as foreplay once, he said to her, tell me what's one of my favorite speeches of yours?
Me tell you?
And he meant it. No,
I see.
He had this girl. You know, here's something I've never said.
Got it.
I've never said to a girl, I'm embarrassed if I ask them, I'm like, did you listen to the show today? It's usually so if they have, I don't bore them by telling them about the show. I never have been like, you know what turned me on? Tell me about one of my shows you like. Never, ever. But with Anthony Weiner, part of the turn-on was they knew they were talking to Congressman Anthony Weiner.
Well, that's evidence of extreme narcissism, by the way. But nevertheless, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's partially what's going on with Hunter Biden. I would love to. By the way, Hunter Biden, if you're listening, because you're sometimes driving to the DMV. Come on, I would love to interview you anytime. We'll talk about crack whores, sure, because it's fascinating. But, you know, we can talk about other stuff if you want to as well. Not just that. That's my pitch to Hunter Biden right there, Mark. Coming up right after this. Unfortunately, he had to listen to that. The great Tim Canova, former candidate down in Florida, who took on the Debbie Wasserman Schultz machine. And it was as nasty as it sounds. Tim Canova right after this on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back. It's the Backstory, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. I'm Lee Stranahan, your host. And joining us today is our special guest host. I didn't actually introduce him. He just sort of magically appeared. And then, boom, we were talking about stuff. Did you notice that, Mark? We just slid right into the conversation.
I like that. That's the way to do it. Efficiency.
Well, I like it, too. You know, when I first got this time slot, I thought about it because one of the things is I actually think about the way the shows work. And like on Fault Lines, I felt like when I was co-hosting Fault Lines, we were often the first news people would hear of the day. Like I pictured our audience, and they're often getting up and making their coffee or going into work even in the car, and we're the first news they heard. So I like to keep the guests flowing. Does that make sense? Like, let's keep a lot of guests going. So we do 15-minute segments because I thought in the morning that worked better. But with this show, because we're at night, people have heard the news all day. And I want to make this show, like you ever had this experience, I'm sure you have, Mark. You're at a restaurant or a bar, and someone's having a really interesting conversation. You're not eavesdropping, but you can't help but overhear a really interesting conversation in the next booth. And I mean, not a gossipy one. I mean, a really actually interesting one. You've had that happen, right?
Happens every week when I go to Waffle House for breakfast.
There we go. It's one of the reasons I enjoy Waffle House. You get your conversation scattered, smothered, covered, and chunked. And I wanted this show to be like that, like you're overhearing a really interesting conversation. And I was very explicit about that. Like, that's what I want to happen. So that's where this idea of guest host came. You're doing a great job, Mark. And it's great to have entrepreneur, educator, economist, and prog rock drummer Mark Frost joining us on Frosty Fridays every week. Now joining us, law professor and former congressional candidate from the 23rd District in Florida. Someone we've not talked to in a while, but I always enjoy talking to the great Tim Canova. Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Fine. Thank you, Lee. Great to be with you.
Great to have you back on the show. Now, let me ask you this, Tim. For those of you people who are not paying close attention to Florida's what the 23rd District is, what the hell's the 23rd District? What region does that cover?
The 23rd starts just north of Miami Beach on the coastline and heads north through Aventura and Hollywood and Dania Beach, then makes a turn west and goes through Plantation, Cooper City, Davie, Weston, Pembroke Pines. That's basically it in a nutshell. You recall when that building collapsed north Miami Beach last year? I think it was last year. That was the southern tip of the district. So it's,
yeah, and I know that area a little bit because I had an uncle who lived in Hollywood, and my dad used to go down to Florida quite often for the winter. But no.
Demographics are heavily Democratic, about 40% Democrat, 35% Independent, and about 25% Republican. That is
well. See, that'll bring me
over.
Yeah.
Florida, apparently the registration of Republicans has been increasing rather dramatically for the past year or two now.
Now, I want to talk to you about that. But by the way, up here where I am in South Dakota, it's much easier. The congressional district is the state of South Dakota. We only have one congressional district.
Right, I know.
So it's cake. Now, we had Enrique Tarrio from the Proud Boys on yesterday, and he's down in Florida as well. And Enrique was saying, he's on the right. He likes living in Florida. And as you know, Tim, Ron DeSantis is very popular with a lot of Republicans outside of Florida, as well as a lot of Republicans inside. But what I said to Enrique was I was talking about, on one hand, what's the weather like where you are right now, Tim? Let me ask that.
Oh, I think it's about mid-70s right now. Yeah, mid-70s. No, high 70s, 79 degrees. It feels a little cooler, a little breezy. But, you can't beat this weather.
Right. And because let me tell you, I just checked. I double-checked. Guess what the temperature is where I am in Sioux Falls, South Dakota? Go ahead. Just take a guess, Tim.
20 degrees.
You're off by 16. It's 4 degrees right now.
That's a tough winter. I grew up in New York. I went to law school in Washington, D.C., and college in Pennsylvania. I know what those winters are like. Those winters are still nothing like you're talking about in South Dakota.
Right. And there's a reason you moved to Florida, isn't there?
Well, the climate didn't hurt. I had been practicing law in New York City when I first moved to Miami for a teaching job. And I've been a professor for more than 2 decades now. But
the weather doesn't hurt. You said it, right?
I love the weather. It's funny. When I was running against Wasserman Schultz, it was a late August primary, the first time. And, the heat and humidity always gets real bad in August. And I was saying on the campaign trail that we had one major advantage over Wasserman Schultz down the home stretch, that no matter how hot and humid it got, I was never going to have a bad hair day.
Now, and something to be able...
Your listeners might not know, but I don't have hair. I've got a shaved head.
There we go. And you wear it well. And let me just ask this: where you are in that part of South Florida, because I lived in Orlando as an adult for a little bit. I taught at a school that was on where Universal Studios is, basically. And we would get liquid sunshine every afternoon. Basically, it would rain about 3 p.m. every day. Do you get that kind of weather down in South Florida? You know what I'm talking about, the liquid sunshine, right?
Yes, quite often. I'd say for several months of the year, the sun keeps shining through the pouring rain. It's beautiful. It's those showers are very refreshing, and they pass pretty quickly sometimes.
And they do, but they're a steady feature of the weather. I don't know how else to put it, but they're very consistent. And I noticed that after living there a while, I'm like, okay, it does this every day. That's what's happening. And you're right. It's worse in some months than others.
Here. Yeah, Lee, I love it down here. And, I heard that last year the Florida Realtor of the Year award went to, I think, 2 people, Gavin Newsom and Andrew Cuomo. The Realtors Association of Florida gave them their annual award. So we are getting a lot of people who are tired of the way New York and California and Illinois and a few other states are being run. And, I must say I'm very proud that Florida is a freer state than most.
Well, let me ask you this on that freedom. One of the things I said to Enrique, and he's down in Florida and he loves it as well. I said the thing about Florida is you could get the next governor could be a Democrat. Whereas in South Dakota, I can safely predict the next governor will be a Republican. And I can safely predict 100%. It's the politics are much more boring up in South Dakota. Republican wins. Sort of like tetherball. There's a joke a comedian made. What's the rule there? Tall guy wins? And he's right. And so the rule in South Dakota is Republican person wins. That's what happens. But Florida could kind of go either way. You sometimes get a Democrat winning. What do you think's going on, and do you agree with that? Is that still the case in Florida? Or do you think the Democrats have blown it? Tim?
It's been the case, no doubt. And we saw as recently as 2018 where DeSantis squeaked by with a close victory, a narrow margin over Andrew Gillum for the governor. And the U.S. Senate race, Rick Scott narrowly defeated the Democrat incumbent Bill Nelson. So that was close. There does seem to be a rather significant shift happening. I think 2020 was the year that it really took off, where Republican registration has started to increase rather significantly. It's hard to predict the future, of course. It's hard to predict an election that's even a few months away, let alone a year or two away. But I'd put my money on DeSantis winning it for re-election. I mean, he is very popular here. Of course, he's extremely unpopular among the Democratic establishment here. They vilify him nonstop. But his popularity overall in the state is pretty clear.
It is similar here in this is Mark. It's I'm in North Georgia, and it's very similar in Georgia. Basically, Atlanta is blue, and most of the rest of Georgia is red. But even among the blue, just the Waffle House buzz, the people that I bump into, the conversations I have, there's a lot of whatever you want to call them. I'm going to call them independently minded Democrats that are not happy. They're exceptionally disappointed in Biden. They don't like where the country's going on a multiple of variables. And I can see Atlanta going just purely a red upset, so to speak, even here, even in Georgia. So I can just imagine what it would be like in Florida. And being that I immigrated to Georgia from Texas, Texas is the same way.
Oh, I got to say, I'm glad to hear that update. And I was in North Georgia, Blue Ridge, Georgia, in late August. Oh, my God. My first time there. It is beautiful. The natural environment is pristine. I really loved it.
I'm a big backpacker, and that's why I moved here. So,
let me do this to Tim, Mark, Tim. By the way, Tim, you're on with Mark Frost.
Nice to meet you, Mark.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Now, let me ask this, Tim. Are you already seeing money coming into Florida to beat DeSantis? Are you already starting to see ads pick up, that kind of thing?
I haven't. I think the Democrats are having some problems. I know Nikki Fried is the agriculture secretary, the only Democrat who I think has been elected to statewide office right now. And her campaign's been having some problems. I think Charlie Crist, the former Republican turned Democrat, I don't know what he is right now. He's also running, and I don't think his campaign's off to a good start. Really, I think there's a lot of interesting races around the country, and maybe this will turn into one. But right now, it's DeSantis's to lose. He's been quite popular in pushing back against the Biden administration, and there's a lot to push back against. The national polls are very telling. I think Biden's approval rating, even among Democrats, is quite low. I think his overall approval rating is in the 20s, they say, and usually you don't see that until the very end of an unpopular administration like George W. Bush in his last year. and here it's Biden in his first year. So the Democrats have a lot of problems right now, and I don't think they have much in the way of a strategy. They're still campaigning against Donald Trump, and anyone who disagrees with them is really kind of smeared as a racist and a misogynist and a Putin puppet. And, I think that's worn thin at this point.
Well, Tim, let me ask you you've told the story many times before, I'm sure, but briefly tell your story again for those who might not know. You're a progressive Democrat who decided to run against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, an establishment Democrat. How did that go, Tim? Tell that story.
It is a fascinating story. I've been a progressive Democrat most of my years, and back when I was running, I considered myself a John Kennedy kind of a progressive Democrat. I think the party has shifted quite a lot in just the last few years. I don't know if John Kennedy would find a place in today's Democratic Party. But I challenged Debbie Wasserman Schultz in 2016 in a Democratic primary, and she was the chair of the Democratic National Committee at the time. So it was very much a David versus Goliath campaign. And Wasserman Schultz had made herself extremely unpopular among the rank and file of the Democrats for putting her thumb on the scales to help Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders. And our campaign went viral. We raised almost $4 million from 209,000 individual donations with an average donation of $17 each. It broke all records at the time for highest percentage of small donations online for any federal campaign ever. And we took that money and we put it back right into the district. We had 4 field offices. Bernie Sanders only had 1 in all of South Florida in 2016. We had 4 in our 1 district, including a field office right in Wasserman Schultz's hometown of Weston. And I'd say around the middle of the summer or early summer, the polls really started shifting in our favor. Our final field numbers showed us absolutely crushing her, and this was our experience on the ground at all of the early voting sites and the election day sites. We knew she always had the advantage in the early vote, the absentee ballots, the nursing homes that vote that way, but we really saw a significant shift near the end of the campaign. And the day before the election, the local NBC6 affiliate had up on their website a preview of the next day's election. And, of course, no votes had been counted yet, so all the races were 0-0 with no precincts reporting, except our race. It had Wasserman Schultz ahead by 13, 14 percentage points with about 70% of the precincts reporting. We called up NBC and asked, what is this about? They took it down. They never gave an explanation. So things seemed fishy near the very end of the campaign. And the polls closed on Election Day. Within an hour, Wasserman Schultz was declared a victor by about the same percentage that NBC had reported the day before. And I never conceded. I instead asked to see the paper ballot. I should also say that in the days after the election, I started to receive quite a few phone calls from election experts, the number crunchers, those who analyze the data, who were saying that the data, the election results, something funny had happened, that it didn't seem kosher. There were theories that the vote had been flipped through software manipulation, and they said they had seen the same patterns of algorithms, you could say, used against Sanders in the primaries. I'm not an expert on those, on number crunching like that. I didn't know. So I just said, why don't we inspect the paper ballots? And if they match up in some of the key precincts, then I'll concede. Well, that was the beginning of quite a drama, because the supervisor of elections, Brenda Snipes, a Democrat, who openly campaigned with and for Wasserman Schultz, she stonewalled us on the ballot request. And, we were entitled to these ballots under Florida's public records law. I finally filed a lawsuit. While the lawsuit was very active, in fact, just days after our first discovery request, Brenda Snipes destroyed every ballot that was cast in Broward County. These are felonies. And to this day, no one's ever been prosecuted. And she admitted to the ballot destruction in sworn videotape deposition. We got a copy of the ballot destruction order. and there's been no justice. So why would the supervisor of elections destroy every paper ballot that was cast if they weren't trying to cover something up? You know, it really left a very bad taste in everybody's mouth. It was a bit of a preview of what was to come 2 years later when the race for governor and the race for U.S. Senate came crashing like a wreck in Broward County. Both those races, as I said before, the DeSantis victory and the Rick Scott victory were too close to call, and Broward was still counting ballots for days, and Brenda Snipes was still finding ballots, thousands of ballots days afterwards. So, the point I made at the time was that any supervisor of elections who would destroy every ballot, who knows what she's doing with finding new ballots. But again, she should have been prosecuted. It was a case that really any second-year law student could have prosecuted successfully. And my election lawyer, who was a Republican, got back to me after a couple of weeks and said I couldn't count on the Republicans prosecuting her because they had the same friends as Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and meaning the same financial backers, the big interests that have been controlling both parties in Florida for decades. So,
well, no, and what this reminds me of, Tim, is that voter fraud used to be a progressive issue. Now it's associated, any claims of it are associated with Donald Trump and January 6th or whatever. But I remember.
Right. I put a lot of the blame squarely on Bernie Sanders. There were so many election integrity analysts and activists who were pointing to several key primaries where the numbers didn't add up. And in 2016, in his primary against Hillary Clinton, and he never challenged any of the election results and got behind and endorsed Hillary Clinton, even though there was quite the suspicion that her campaign was rigged.
And by the way, since we're speaking of things that are associated with the Republicans now, that really had their origins in that, I was the first one I know to do a tweet about the Seth Rich story. Seth Rich is somebody who a lot of Republicans talk about now. But I was down at the DNC, and I saw a guy holding up a sign and said, "I am Seth Rich." So I went up to him, I interviewed him. I didn't know who that was. I had him explain. And he was a progressive Democrat. And he thought the Seth Rich thing, he noticed that Seth Rich was killed the day that Sanders endorsed Hillary. That was his narrative. Now, I never hear anybody mention that now, but it's true. And I'm not saying one has to do with the other. I'm not saying correlation equals causation. But I'm saying this guy said that. And I'm sure you heard. Yeah, go ahead.
That happened right down the home stretch of my campaign. Bernie Sanders had basically folded up his campaign, and I was still running. The convention was, I think, in early July, and my election wasn't until August 30th. So the reports of Seth Rich's murder were swirling all over the place. Democrats all over the country, grassroots progressive Democrats were incensed about it. The media wanted to pin me down. I was supposed to absolve the DNC of any role in his murder. And I said there should be an investigation. What do I know? And for that, I got criticized. I want to make another point, though, that one of the eye-openers that came out of this experience for me and for many others was a bit more scrutiny of the election systems down here, of the electronic voting. And here in Florida, it's ES&S, Election Systems and Software. And they own the machines. They own that we pass our paper ballots through. They're taken, they're scanned to be tabulated. They own the software. We're not allowed to inspect the software because it's proprietary, trade secrets. And, I didn't have a lot of confidence in that type of a framework. And I started to look into, I was wondering, well, who sits on the board of directors of ES&S? Who are the major shareholders? And to my surprise, you couldn't get that information because ES&S is owned by a private equity firm, the McCarthy Group, based in Omaha, Nebraska. I mean, you can't make this up. Private equity firms, hedge funds, these are very wealthy, shadowy investors have that kind of a role in our elections. And the final thing I'll say is that if Donald Trump had, squeaked out a victory in 2020, I guarantee the Democrats would have been screaming about the electronic voting machines being rigged. The system we have is such that anyone who loses a controversial election is going to have suspicions, rightfully so.
Yeah, no, and Mark, let me throw it to you, but I just want to say, people need to remember that this stuff is a lot more, it's a bad word, bipartisan, but this is a lot more, let me say, cross-partisan. I'll use that word. Because bipartisan often...
This should concern us as Americans. It shouldn't have anything to do with parties.
Right. No, and that's why I don't like the term bipartisan, because it usually means some people have agreed on some war or something like that. So cross-partisan,
right, it should be nonpartisan. Yeah.
Right. It should be. But Mark, let me throw it to you for Tim Canova.
Yeah, I have just a kind of an observation I'd like Tim's judgment on. I'm an economist, not a political wonk, but I've been following polls of Tulsi Gabbard, and conservatives and people moderately on the right like her. In some polls, she polls better than Trump among Republican independents. You have any thoughts on that? I find it fascinating.
I was a Tulsi Gabbard supporter in the past myself, and
I was too.
A lot of great qualities. She also was a vice chair of the DNC in 2016, and that's a powerful position to be the vice chair. And she was a young congresswoman with military experience and really kind of chosen, you could say, selected for the fast track for party leadership, being a vice chair. And she resigned as vice chair when she saw how Wasserman Schultz was using the DNC to stack things against Bernie Sanders. So she became an instant celebrity on the left among the Bernie Sanders supporters, among that crowd. And I had a lot of respect for her, and I still do. My only criticisms of her these days are that in her final year as a congresswoman, she voted for the CARES Act and the PrEP Act. She voted to greenlight 5G without any kind of legislative hearings or findings on whether there was EMF pollution as a result of 5G. And she co-sponsored a Wasserman Schultz bill for universal tracking. So I think, should she be forgiven for that? I mean, a lot of members of Congress, I think, just jumped on board with the Fauci agenda of how to deal with the pandemic at the time. And maybe in hindsight, she would do things differently. I don't know. I haven't spoken to her about any of that. But she might be a force to be reckoned with in the future. I think she does do very well among independent-minded folks, whether they're on the right or the left.
Now, Tim, it's always great to talk to you. We only have a few seconds left. Speaking of the COVID-19 thing, what do you think of the recent Johns Hopkins study that showed that the lockdowns were bad? What was your take on that, Tim?
I was very happy to see that. It really confirms what I've been saying from the very beginning. This is the way the powers in Washington dealt with this pandemic was very counterproductive. Locking healthy people inside for weeks and months at a time is bound to undermine their health, both their physical health and their mental health. And I think it's a catastrophe the way we, as a country, responded to the pandemic. I think 1 out of 5 small businesses went under because of the shutdowns. The greatest redistribution of wealth from working folks and small businesses to the super rich in recorded history, in the shortest amount of time in recorded history.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I'm also critical.
And Tim, the music's on. We gotta go. But Tim Canova, former congressional candidate for the 23rd District, law professor. Tim, always great to have you on the show. Hopefully we can get you back on again soon. It is great to talk to you. It's been too long, sir. We got more coming up with Mark Frost joining us as co-host right after this on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Call 202-521-1320.
Live from America and just outside the Matrix is a show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. It's the backstory.
Time?
Rod, can you take us in?
Hey, Mark. Yeah, hey, Mark, we're having a little difficulty with Lee Stranahan right now with getting his connection. But, yeah, but wanted to talk to you a little bit about the economy. In the meantime, before we get Lee back on, I saw I can't remember his name, but I saw someone talking about the interest rates. And I wanted to get your take on how the interest rates are going to go on.
Sure. I've been an inflation hawk right here on Sputnik Radio for at least 2 years. And anytime I've been invited on to talk about it, I've been warning of impending inflation, and that was before the pandemic.
Hey Mark.
Yeah.
Real quick, Mark. Real quick. This is the backstory. Continue on.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, so I've been an inflation hawk for a long time. Then the pandemic came, and then the Federal Reserve started deciding who the winners and the losers were going to be. And, as soon as I saw the amount of new money being printed, and new money in the form of Federal Reserve electronic banknotes, and then Treasury Department electronic bonds, and I knew right then, if we're going to print $10 trillion, then and increase the money supply by roughly a third, then we're going to have inflation somewhere between 25 and 50% over the next 18 months or so. So I'm on the record of saying something like that. Then I started wanting to know, okay, who does it actually hurt? Well, if you make half of the median income, so if you make $35,000 a year in your household, your effective inflation rate is about 40%. That is, the money that you have today buys about 60% of the stuff that it bought a year ago. And it's because the federal measures of inflation are considerably lower than they actually are because they weight down the outliers. So gasoline isn't weighted as a simple average. They sort of torture the data till it has a number that is a little more agreeable. But if you're one of the working poor, there's inflation. You don't have to turn on the news and see it. You see it in two forms. Prices have gone up, or if the price has stayed the same, the amount of material or services that you get for that particular dollar has gone down. We see it. Sometimes it's called shrinkflation. So maybe before you used to get 16 ounces in a package, and now you get 10 ounces. And that's inflation just like anything else. Gasoline out of the roof. So when the Federal Reserve decides that they're going to fight inflation, there is no button called raise rates. What they end up actually doing, if they want to stimulate the economy, they buy bonds from banks at a discount. So they flood the banks with money, and the banks go make low-interest loans, and the economy booms. If they want to retard the economy, then they sell bonds at a discount, and that motivates banks to buy those bonds because it's a guaranteed extra rate of return, and that withdraws money out of the banking system, and there's less reserves for banks to loan out, and by selling those at a discount, it reduces the price of bonds, and there's an inverse relationship between the price of bonds and the interest rate. So when the Federal Reserve says that they're going to reduce interest rates, which they've already announced, what that means is they're going to purposely retard the economy so that they can fight inflation. Well, guess who suffers the most? It's the people the least likely to weather the storm. It's it's the lower end of the working poor who get thrown into unemployment, because that's literally what quantitative tightening is it's purposely increasing unemployment.
So, Mark,
Yeah.
I want to ask you something that's also positive. So I'll come back to that, but I want to make sure we get to the calls. 202-521-1320. Thanks, Rod, for filling in while I lost the internet briefly there. But I'm back because I called into 202-521-1320. I'm back on the phone right now. But, Sharif, what's on your mind?
Thank you, gentlemen, for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Dunninger, hashtag no more. Stephen Dunninger had his piece, the ankle bracelet removed today. That's some good news. Julian Assange, NFT, non-fungible tokens. That's the group WikiLeaks working with the Murray It's they raised $7.8 million in Ethereum tokens. That's good. It haven't been a week and it made up to $7.8 million already. They was talking about having protests in the United States dealing with the trucker community, with the truckers, and Facebook is trying to ban the different websites, but truckers can talk to each other at the trucker stops and also over the CB radio. So they can get a way around it. My last comment is dealing with Russia is using the euro now to trade, to work with the Chinese and selling the natural gas and petroleum to the Chinese and also India, which is the weakening over time is going to weaken the dollar by people going to the euro or some other type of currency. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, Sharif, great call as usual. Let me talk about Russia and China a little bit more. Russia and China released some statements today because, as I mentioned, Vladimir Putin is over in China covering the Olympics. Vladimir Putin, you could have used a Sputnik, tag along. I'm just saying, I'm telling Vladimir Putin I would have gone to Russia with him. That's what I'm trying to tell him. But I guess that ship has already sailed because he's there already. But China and Russia released a number of statements today saying that they are closer than allies, saying that they're in the strongest possible terms. We talked about this from Middle Shan yesterday. China is sending a very clear message that they are backing Russia, and I think with good reason. You know what else I found out, Mark? And I didn't know this, because I don't watch Fox, actually. I've talked about Tucker Carlson before. I've talked to Tucker a few times in real life. I like Tucker. But I don't watch his show because I don't watch anybody's show. And do you watch much Fox, Mark? I assume not, correct?
No, I watch a little bit of I don't watch any MSNBC. I found that to be worthless. I do watch some CNN and I do watch some Fox. I'm not addicted to it. I don't have it on all the time, but there's some decent programming on both. So I like to get a good range of thoughts and views.
So the only stuff that I see of Tucker's, I've never sat through one of his shows ever. And again, I'm not saying that makes me better or cooler or anything. I'm just saying I haven't. So I didn't know this. So the only time I see Tucker is when he's talking about something I care about, like Assange or Russia, and he's always good on that stuff. And I sort of never quite understood why hasn't he been fired yet? Why do they keep Tucker around? So what I found out recently was that Tucker is a China hawk.
Well, also, he has the top-rated show on Fox. The top-rated show on all of Fox News.
And I'm only convinced that goes so far, because in theory it should. But a lot of times, like I would say some of the moves that MSNBC or CNN make, clearly they don't care about having the number one rated show.
Obviously.
Because there's other factors. But when I found out that Tucker is as hawkish on China and almost obsessed with China and talking about the dangers of China and the CCP, it made sense to me. I'm like, they'll let him get away with saying some stuff that's correct on Assange or even Russia occasionally because he's pushing the globalist line on China. Now, Mark, I'm curious briefly. This is my take on China. China, first off, I don't have any reason to defend them. But when I see everybody picking a target like they've done with China, I'm a little suspicious. And what I know is a lot of the China used to be a much more authoritarian, pure communist state, and that by putting market reforms in over there, they've been successful. But part of what they've been successful, and they've helped America be successful, is because a lot of manufacturing, what I'll call low-level manufacturing, like, for instance, I think the success of Silicon Valley, two things, and I'll get your take on this. Two things are responsible for it that no one ever talks about. One, cheap hardware from China. Two, cheap labor from India in terms of programmers and stuff like that. So the software is created, which allows them to make more money cheaply by offshore labor. Like sometimes they'll bring the labor over here in the cases of India and H-1B visas. But the cheap hardware manufacturing in China has been a huge benefit to the U.S. economy.
Absolutely.
Mark, what's your take on that?
Yes, it absolutely has been. This is one of the principles of economics, going back to the days of David Ricardo, that generally speaking, free trade, if it really is generally free trade, benefits everybody. So when I was a kid, everybody was getting wigged out and stressed out because the United States wasn't making televisions anymore. They didn't realize we were going to be expanding into pharmaceuticals, aerospace, and the types of jobs people had would change, but most people got better jobs than what they had working at the Magnavox television factory as those types of things got outsourced. Then the LED revolution came around, and that was brought back to the United States. We started making TVs again. And it's called comparative advantage. And a great way to look at it is rice. Which country can produce the most rice in the world? It's the United States. Indeed, we're the largest exporter of rice. So just because you can produce the most doesn't mean that you want to produce the most, because the opportunity cost of us gearing up and turning all of our land into rice paddies would be prohibitively high. So it makes sense for a country that has a comparative advantage to trade with another company that has another country that has a different comparative advantage. And that's the whole concept of trade. I'll trade with you, and you trade with me, and we'll give each other the best of what we have to offer. And in China's case, what we get from China is low-grade circuitry. That's what we really get from China, low-grade circuitry and manufacture. What we get from India is low-grade programming. If you're making an electric toaster and you want an electronic interface, chances are an Indian company is coding that up. If you want to build a spacecraft and take it to Mars, chances are an American company is coding that up. And so that's where the comparative advantage comes in. And I'm a big proponent of free trade if it's free trade. And from a game theoretic, moving away from economics into political economy, there's a reason why Europe doesn't go to war with each other anymore. It's because they trade with each other. There's a reason China and the United States haven't come to fists. It's because the opportunity cost of one of us taking that step is prohibitively high. I'm not talking nuclear weapons. I'm talking the economic fallout of an all-out trade war would severely damage both countries. And the leadership, I hope, of both countries recognizes that. Maybe not so much this administration. Sometimes I can't tell.
Mark, that's a great point, but you reminded me of something that I wanted to say on today's show that's not related to what you just said, although good points all. But it's related to the show as a whole writ large. Everybody who listens to the show on any regularity knows I often talk about Russian oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Mikhail Khodorkovsky once the richest guy in Russia. He's once the guy. He was the guy. And you I'm sure heard me talk about him, Mark. Because
I think I talked about him last week, if I recall correctly. No, I talked about him on Fault Lines. It was Fault Lines. So sorry. Keep going.
You can't listen to me long without hearing Mikhail Khodorkovsky, because he's really central to the anti-Russian narrative. And I pointed out that in Senate Resolution 322 in 2005 was sponsored by Joe Biden. And there's not a single story ever about that, about Joe Biden sponsoring this Russian oligarch, billionaire. Not one. What does that tell you, Mark? That nobody's ever done a story on that.
Right, because even the documentary about him was rather sympathetic. I don't know if you saw it, but it's on Amazon. You can watch it at a marginal cost of zero. But I thought it was on net. It was fairly pro. On net, it seemed to have a bias toward his side of events. And
because it's propaganda. He and Bill Browder, who he sponsored as well, they learned the way to do this in the West is get documentaries about you, get books that are in airports, that kind of thing. So absolutely, it is.
Yes, and you know what makes it a scandal is how it all happened. I mean, I don't think I was ever so happy when the East German Wall came down and it looked like the Soviet Union, United States of America Cold War was ending. And we were all the youngsters don't remember this, but everybody was talking about the peace dividend. The peace dividend. Just think about what a better world we're going to have because of the peace dividend. And we sent our neocon economists over there and to advise them, and we're like, and they said, oh, you got to go cold turkey. And they started talking about property rights to a country that had no concept of property rights, either under the Soviet Union or, for that matter, not really even during the czars. So the smart money in the post-Soviet Russia, everybody was given a certificate of ownership of natural resources. It was a piece of paper. What are they supposed to do with it? They had no concept. The common people had no concept of stock markets and passive income and things like that. So the smart people in Russia started buying up these certificates because that's the free market, right? And so they were buying these certificates at pennies on the dollar from people who needed to eat. And so you had the oligarchs who erupted from that system, and a lot of people were like, wow, I'm kind of missing communism right now. And that's the crime of the United States. We did not send good advice to the post-Soviet bureaucrats that were in charge with rebuilding the country. And now compound that mistake with the West has invaded Russia 3 times in modern history and 1 time severely in World War II, which resulted in tens of millions of deaths of Russian citizens. And when the wall came down, there was a gentleman's agreement that there would be a buffer zone of countries between the West and Russia so that war would never have to be thought about again. And a story I love to tell is, very few people realize this, but Mongolia petitioned the Soviet Union to become part of the Soviet Union. The Soviets said, no thanks. We like you there as a buffer. We don't want to go to war with China. We'd just as soon you stay there, and we don't want to have that big of a border with China. And that's the Russian mindset. They are exceptionally sensitive to invasion from the West because it's been their shared experience. And so when we have these hawk neocon politicians that talk about, well, we need this organization to expand eastward called NATO, when there's really no reason for it to exist in the first place anymore. It's an anachronism now. World War II is over. The Cold War is over. We won both of them. There's no reason for NATO to exist, and yet we're expanding it eastward. If I was in charge of Russian defense, I would be concerned. I would be very concerned. And so it seems, this is why I texted you. I think it was a few days ago, and I go, Lee, I'm an economist. I don't claim to know a lot about journalism, but are most journalists really as lazy as I've kind of come to think they are? And you replied and said, yeah. Because nobody seems to have, when I say nobody, I mean almost nobody in the mainstream media has bothered to just educate themselves on the basic history of the Russian people and how that might change their attitudes toward the West.
And that laziness we're talking about is why I say, and by the way, Frank, I see you on the line. I'll get to you in 1 second, but I wanted to bring this up. Everything you're saying is absolutely true, Mark, and is important. And it's the laziness of journalism. This is a story that writes itself, particularly if you're on the right. Biden's oligarch, how Biden, McCain, and Obama sponsored the richest oligarch in Russia, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, is a story that writes itself. You copy and paste the bill. Does that make sense? But nobody's done it. And journalists are lazy, and that tells you editors don't want to do that story for some reason. Well, let me tell you, when you understand that it was McCain, Obama, and Biden that sponsored Khodorkovsky, a lot of things in Russiagate make sense. And why Biden
also Hillary Clinton.
After... And well, but on this one bill, Senate Resolution 322.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
It was Biden was the sponsor, and the two co-sponsors were Obama and McCain. Someone pointed something out to me last night that I didn't know, and they assumed I knew it, and I didn't. But it's a huge story. That's the Senate version, Senate Resolution 322. But there was a House version, as is common in Washington, of the same bill supporting Khodorkovsky. Do you know who the sponsor of that bill was in the House?
I do not.
And when I didn't know who it was either, and now it makes perfect sense. It was this guy in Mississippi, Vickers. He's the one who came out a couple weeks ago and said we need to use nukes against Russia.
That's insane.
And Vickers is not a well-known congressman. So the fact is, he was sponsored by this oligarch Khodorkovsky, and now he's the one making headlines by saying we should nuke Russia. And I'm saying there's no accident. The move to get rid of Obama, forgive me, to get rid of Putin, I misspoke. The move to get rid of Putin has been sponsored by Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who, if you look at his Open Russian Society, it says openly he wants to replace Vladimir Putin. He wants to get rid of him. Life after Putin, stuff he does. But this guy Victor's is sponsored by a Russian oligarch. So for a guy who's anti-Russian, funny, he's sponsored by the same Russian oligarch that sponsored Biden, Obama, and McCain, and that they sponsored back. Because you don't sponsor someone like that unless they've sponsored you. And he's also the funding behind the Magnitsky Act and Bill Browder. So I wanted to mention that. It was this nut Vickers who's connected to Khodorkovsky. Because I didn't know that. Thanks to someone on Twitter for mentioning that. 202-521-1320. Frank in California, you have a question about the economy, right? Sorry, thanks for waiting. Appreciate it.
Hi, Lee. Hi, Mark. Yeah, thanks. No problem. I wanted to bring up a couple news stories about China that might be interesting. They kind of got buried after COVID. And then I had a question about a finance-specific topic for your guest or co-host. About China, I believe it was right after COVID had started, maybe January. I think the ambassador from China to Israel passed away kind of suddenly in Tel Aviv. Sorry, I can't fact-check that right this minute, but I'm pretty sure it was January. I don't know if they ever explained the cause of death. Funny enough, around that time, everything was being attributed to COVID, but he didn't go as far as to say that in the articles about his passing. But it was a bit sudden and awkward. And Israeli-Chinese tensions, they sometimes collaborate on technology and tech transfer, perhaps at the disapproval of the U.S. I remember Pompeo, around the time of the Chinese ambassador dying, like shortly before, shortly after, he said China needs to get out of Israel, kind of thing, in terms of commerce, because of how wary the U.S. is of, tech being transferred inadvertently, accidentally, or intentionally. And then also, a lot of people miss this story. In the month of the George Floyd riots, when they were really underway, the Houston consulate of the Chinese government was closed for espionage. Now, of course, there's a lot of space stuff in Houston, probably a lot of different angles for that, but super interesting. Doesn't really relate to my question at all, but Lee, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, how are you relating the George Floyd protest to the closing? How do you see that connecting?
Well, George Floyd, I don't think has any connection to China necessarily, but, they did undergo something kind of similar as they saw it with Hong Kong. And then we had all of our media pushing, I don't want to say they were peaceful protesters, right, according to the mainstream media. So it's like if you were thinking China was using our media to our detriment, because they have a lot of people blackmailed or ideologically pro-China or pro-Great Reset, they would push things like lockdowns at perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, but looking at Australia and China's strategic interest in Australia and how they've got a really tough course of tyranny, as some would say. And then in the U.S., we've just had a great amount of division since Charlottesville and that kind of that era of identity politics going into overdrive, which some would blame on Trump. When you look at Charlottesville, it's actually not that different from what NATO has been doing in Ukraine with the Maidan and stuff. There wasn't that level of violence.
Charlottesville directly connects to Ukraine. Directly connects to it. That was a ginned-up protest that nobody was talking about on the right. Nobody I knew who was just a normal conservative Republican knew anything about that. Then I started to hear the left talking about it. Oh, all these Nazis are going to gather, and they represent Trump. But no one who were Trump supporters who I knew anything about it. It was people like Richard Spencer and Michael and Matthew Heimbach and people like that. And it clearly, the Tiki Torch iconography is Ukrainian, as are the blood and soil flags down there. And what it was used to do was to tie Trump supporters to Ukrainian-style Nazism. Whereas the ones who were actually tied to it were establishment Republicans like McCain, like Lindsey Graham, and establishment Democrats like Biden and Obama, and George Soros, who's no friend of Trump-supporting Republicans. So that was all misdirection, I think, intentionally. And I've talked about that before. Mark, any thoughts on what Frank was saying?
Yeah.
Go to break.
Yeah, I think just from a game theoretic perspective, it's clearly, let's just talk theory only. Forget data and experience right now. From a game theory perspective, it makes sense for China to want to see more disorder, that is, less order in our society. It would make sense for China and Russia to merge towards each other as our neocon portion of our population makes enemies of both of them. And I'm not here to justify anything that any particular leader has done or not done, other than just say we cannot continue in the post-World War II mindset of we're going to be the thought police of the world. Just because something offends our values doesn't mean it necessarily has to have our military and economic sanction against it. At some point, we have to decide we're going to play in the world, and the best way to change China is how we were doing it until fairly recently, and that is trade with them. that changes people. Indonesia got changed by just simply trading with the United States. I would go to a village. I spent my dissertation in a village. Dirt floor, grass hut with one electrical cord hanging down from the ceiling. They would plug a TV into it and they would watch Friends. American culture permeated that society. You can go downtown in Jakarta and see country and Western swing dancing. And that's a Muslim country. If you want to change a country, take the club away and just trade with them and let them, and just through osmosis, they'll change, and maybe we can learn some good things from them too.
And of course, that's sound economics, but a lot of people in the establishment want a rigged game. They don't want fair trade. They want to control both sides and of the equation. And so they win either way, because that's more of a sure thing than the vagaries of the market. But we're joined by Mark Frost as the guest host right now. And coming up, right after this break, Carmine Sabia joins us. We got more coming up on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the report.
Let's talk about that. Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back for the final half hour of the week here on the best damn radio show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. We're joined by the great Mark Frost on a frosty Friday. And it's really frosty here. Like I was telling Tim, it's like 3 degrees right now, Mark. That's cold. Yeah, it's rough. And it's hard to explain how cold it is, because it's so cold, it makes you not want to go out. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does completely.
And it's not that it's snowy. There's no snow, especially. It's just like you go, indoors is good. I'll stay here. That's nice. So you get cabin fever a little bit. Joining us right now are co-hosts on Mondays, on Carmine Mondays. Carmine Sabia is joining us. Hey, Carmine, how you doing?
I kind of feel like I should challenge Mr. Cross to a fight, man. It's a battle of the co-hosts.
No. We're all one big happy family. Now, Carmine, I understand you have some breaking news for us, a headline of some sort. Is this accurate?
I do.
I was told that earlier.
Did you guys cover it?
No, I don't know. I was a little nervous. I thought it might be that you challenged Mark Frost to a fight or something.
About Michael Avenatti?
Well, I don't know. Is that what it was? Because they were hung. And by the way, in any...
No, he was found guilty.
Yeah, he was found guilty, Lee.
Last I heard, by the way, any jury trial involving the Stormy Daniels case, involving the word hung at all, the jokes write themselves.
Oh, geez.
Let me just leave it right there. Last I'd heard, they were hung on one count with him.
Oh, they were hung.
But
apparently he was also hung, so I don't know.
Hey, Lee, it says right here, Michael Avenatti convicted of wire fraud and aggravated identity theft.
He faces up to 20 years in prison, yes.
Found guilty of fraud over Stormy Daniels' book. I'm just reading the headlines, but yeah, it's like 2 hours ago, hour ago. So it just happened. Because I heard it on the radio on the way over here.
And I'm just saying, I'm not saying anything dirty even in another language here, Saul. But Stormy Daniels turns out to be, that's some expensive pizza right there. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
You see what I'm getting at?
And not worth it. I mean, when you look at her, I hate to say it, but not worth the price of admission.
No, Stormy Daniels is very attractive for a cocktail waitress at 4 in Poughkeepsie.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying? She's got that look.
I'm not sure about that, Lee. I think I'm going to pass. I'd have to be. It's not my type.
She needs the right lighting. That's all I'm saying.
It's not somebody like, if you want to talk about, now I am an aficionado of porn stars. Now, if you want to talk about somebody like a Brie Olson or something like that, yeah, I get that.
Brie Olson, of course, Charlie Sheen's ex, who was not told by Charlie Sheen that he had AIDS.
Correct.
Thanks, Charlie. That was nice of you. That's also some expensive pizza, Charlie Sheen, right there. But yeah, no, Stormy Daniels is not is not. Brie Olson at least has nice skin, for example, right?
And isn't 300 pounds.
Hey. That's a category of porn. So, judging someone's weight, all it does is to throw you into a new category. It's the same with age. As soon as I found out there's such a thing as GILF porn, I said, there's no limit. GILF. You've heard MILF, of course, is mothers.
Oh, God, no. Please, no.
GILF is grandmothers.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
I'm not making it up. Right. That's as soon as I heard that, I'm like, well, that's one way to keep a career going. You see, just have new categories. But Michael Avenatti,
there's no limits. Then I agree.
Michael Avenatti being found guilty, I got to say, when you can't trust Michael Avenatti, who can you trust? Now, but here's the thing about Stormy Daniels. As much as we're saying about her, really, isn't what we're doing in a way dissing Trump?
Yeah. Yeah, bro, you could have did better. Even my dog agrees.
I don't know though. What was that actor's name that had Elizabeth Hurley? And then he had that affair with that hooker, and she was just not attractive. Let's put it that way.
Hugh Grant. Well, the story I like.
That's right.
Is when Arnold Schwarzenegger came on to one of his housekeepers.
Oh boy! I mean, really.
And if you saw the picture, you'd go, "Wow, Arnold, come on." But but that's men. And again, not to sound like a feminist, but that's men for you, and it is. Men are dogs. That's accurate. And anybody who's denying it, right? And anybody who's denying it is trying to get with a woman and is going to then say, "But not me. I'm not. No. not me, in the hopes that the woman will fall for that line. But yes, you, whoever you are, yes, you under the right circumstances, after the right number of shots, at the right time of night. Oh, okay, you say that. I don't know who you're trying to get with.
I've been in the situation, and I can tell you in no uncertain terms, I have said no probably more times than any man you know. I have said no on a number of occasions.
For the purposes of the radio show, I'll pretend to believe you because it's easier. But
I have standards, my friend.
But there we go. Well,
no, because I skeeve things, bro. Like, I skeeve things.
Now explain to people what skeeving things is for those who don't live in North Jersey. Explain what skeeving is.
Yes, yeah. It's like you look at something and you're like, ew. You know, like how you might feel if you see.
It's like this.
I don't know.
You know, yeah.
Like what?
You know, Earl.
It's like disgust, total disgust.
Yes.
What you missed in the show earlier, Carmine, was Mark Frost was talking about how he's eating bat.
Bat?
Right. Yes. He was in Indonesia, and he ate everything they gave him, bat, lungs.
Now, my
nephew. Separate. The lungs and the bat were separate, weren't they, Mark?
I'm sorry, what?
My nephew's fed. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, because he was also talking about eating lung. I'm asking, were the lung and the bat separate, or was it
the
bat lung you ate?
Yeah, the lung I ate was beef lung because it's a poor country, right? I mean, 15 years ago it was $500 per capita. Now it's about 3,000. They don't waste anything. But the bat was in the island of Sulawesi. And it's a delicacy there. And, you know, I had a client. He ordered it, wanted me to try it. And I go, sure. I've eaten worse.
Now, I'm just going to say this. Making out on the couch with Stormy Daniels is kind of the equivalent of eating a bat. Don't you think?
No, I'd rather eat the bat, man. I just got to tell you. Now, if it's Maitland Ward or something like that, that's a different story. But, yeah. She's just not she's not my girl.
After everything that happened with COVID, you ate a bat, bro?
Yeah, but that was before COVID.
Now, my nephew, basically, for a time, until he became a dad, he lived in Indonesia like 6 months of the year.
Oh, cool.
Never heard a story about him eating a bat or a lung.
Yeah, it's very popular.
And he practically lived there.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty popular delicacy on the island of Sulawesi.
So I will tell you that, I mean, this would skeeve other people out, though, right? I don't judge because last night my dinner was tripe.
I like tripe.
I love tripe.
I love Vietnamese food, especially pho, and tripe is tasty to me, healthy, good. I'm all about tripe. So.
But you have to have it Italian style. I'll send you the recipe. It's fantastic.
Oh, I'll try it.
Well, the price has doubled in recent months. Huh?
See, I was talking about tripas before. I was talking about eating at Mexican taco carts in Los Angeles. And tripas is a thing. There's various stuff you can get. Usually it's not on the big menu that they print, you know, with good lettering. It's usually on the paper bag someone wrote in magic marker. Sesos, tripas. And they tape it to the window. Yeah, no, it is good stuff. But again, I just can't do it. I'm not even knocking it. I just can't. Do you know what?
Have you ever tried it?
I know, because I can't. As soon as I got the thing in my head, as soon as I know what I'm eating, I can't eat it. Do you know what and this brings us to Joe Rogan. Why? Because of Fear Factor.
There's truth to that, though.
Because Fear Factor, where Joe Rogan got his shift into reality programming, because he was a stand-up and he was on the show News Radio with Dave Foley and Andy Dick and other people. And then he was the host of Fear Factor for many years on NBC. And people forget that Fear Factor was a really top-rated show. And I would say Rogan. Do you remember Fear Factor, Carmine?
Yeah, I remember it as something I would not watch under any circumstances.
But
I remember,
Rogan made it.
I remember
Okay,
it
Mark.
because I remember it because I used to use it in my economics class when I would teach advanced microeconomics because of the time preference and the exchange factor of it. Because what you got to remember is these people were paid via a contest format to eat gross things and to have creepy, crawly things on them. And so as the prize dollars got larger, people got braver, which is an economic concept.
No, that's exactly right. And what was, but Joe Rogan absolutely helped make that show successful, because Joe Rogan hosted it in a way where he was very empathetic with the people going through it. And he would just kind of talk to them. Remember that, Mark? The way Rogan would talk to the contestants.
Yes, and sometimes he would even give them confidence or at least bravery by doing it himself. He would eat like a hissing cockroach raw.
Yes. Now, the show where they do it for free, but they made a lot of money, is now there's a new, what is apparently going to be the last installment with the original crew, the new Jackass movie. This would take us right into that pop culture phenomenon.
I know almost nothing about that show. I never watched it. I know what it is. I just haven't ever seen it.
Well, those movies, Carmine, you've got to be a guy who's seen some of the Jackass movies, right?
Not one.
Me either.
Really? Not
one.
I'm shocked. Because
it
they're pop
insults
culture
my
phenomenons.
intelligence. It insults my intelligence.
No, I'll tell you though, it is very funny. It's hard not to laugh out loud. It is very hard, because see, the reason I'm shocked somewhat, Carmine, is you like professional wrestling. And it seems to me there's a bit of crossover.
I started watching wrestling when I was a little kid. And I'll say that one of the guys from Jackass, whoever he is, he was in the Royal Rumble recently. There's a tie-in with wrestling. He was just in it last week, I think.
Well, because some of
whoever the big star is, Bam.
Bam Margera. He's had some mental problems and brain problems recently, unfortunately, Bam.
You think?
But a lot of it, you know what it relates to, actually? And I saw somebody do a good essay about this recently. Skate culture. My younger brother, Ken, a brilliant visual effects artist, but he was a skater and a BMX rider. And I've talked before about how Tony Hawk subscribed to a magazine that I put out years ago. And so he called my apartment to subscribe. And my wife at the time, Shane's mom, said, wait, spell your name again? Tony Hawk, you said? And I was like, oh my God, Tony Hawk's calling. I said, ask me if it's Tony Hawk, the Tony Hawk. And it was. This is before the video games or anything. But a lot of skaters, do you know what skaters loved watching? If you talk to anyone who was a skater of a certain age, my brother was born in '69. So that's when I say of a certain age. They love watching face plants. They love watching videos of skaters attempting to do a trick and failing, and they fall down and they hurt themselves. And the reason they liked it is everyone who is a skater knows that you've got to fail at something. And failing at skate tricks, if you're trying to do, an ollie up onto a rail down a flight of stairs, let's say you're going to grind down a rail on a flight of stairs, you're not going to do that the first time you try it. The first time you try it, you're going to try to jump up. The skateboard's going to go out from under you. You're going to fall on your back and hurt yourself. And so the people in that skate culture, and a lot of those guys, Knoxville was a skater. The reason they like it is because they're doing something. See, this is where I think part of the wrestling tie-in is. Because you know this, Carmine. When people say wrestling is fake, kind of, right? It's kind of fake, but it's not completely fake, right?
Correct.
People genuinely get hurt. I think
By
it
the
was
way, I made
Mick
a
Foley.
mistake. That's the guy that was in the Royal Rumble, Knoxville. I apologize.
Oh, was it Johnny? It makes sense. Well, Johnny's the one who's made a lot of money on this, but when I say what wrestlers really get hurt, they really are getting hurt, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because at a
most of
certain
them
point
are
you
crippled
can't
when
hit,
they're older,
and you can't hit someone with a chair. So there's a certain kind of athleticism. It's the athleticism of masochism, isn't it?
Yeah, there's truth to that.
Now, who did you like for wrestlers? Because I've interviewed Jesse Ventura on this very show.
I would love to interview Jesse. You got to get me his contact on my wrestling show, actually. But my favorite wrestlers were Ricky Steamboat, Bret Hart, guys who were more scientific wrestlers. I was not a Mick Foley guy to watch a guy get hit with a chair and thumbtacks and fire. That wasn't for me. That's not wrestling to me. Wrestling to me is an art form, almost like a dance. And I appreciate the guys who can do it very, very well. Ric Flair, another one. And, of course, as a kid, I was a huge Hulk Hogan fan.
What a guy like Mick Foley was doing was more like a stunt man. And that's the nearest equivalent, right, is stuntmen. Stuntmen are people who get hurt for a living.
Correct.
Right? And there's a certain mentality of, like I say, masochistic athleticism. It's athletic in a sense. It's how much can you take. But, like, it's not necessarily scientific unless you're Jackie Chan, which is a whole other story.
Correct. You know, but I did want to talk about another topic while we're here. We always get sidetracked.
No, and I like the sidetracks, but I got a couple clips I want to get to. Let me get these before we run out of time. Is
Pelosi one of them?
No, this is this reporter going up against Ned Price, who's a spokesman for the State Department, and calling him out. So let's do the first one first, Saul. If people haven't heard this, you've got to hear this. This reporter puts all of the reporters to shame for a while by actually acting like a reporter. And listen to Price. Price has come out and claimed that Russia's about to do a false flag with crisis actors. And so
and
a reporter...
Price is shocked that he's being questioned. Shocked.
Yeah, and everyone can hear that. Saul, let's play the first clip.
Okay, well, that's quite a mouthful there. So you said actions such as these suggest otherwise, meaning that they suggest they're not interested in talks and they're going to go ahead with some kind of What action are you talking about?
One, the actions I've just pointed to. The fact that Russia continues to engage in disinformation campaigns.
You made an allegation that they might do that. Have they actually done it?
What we know, Matt, is what I have just said, that they have engaged in this activity, in this planning activity. But let me because obviously this is not the first time we've made these reports public. You'll remember that just a few weeks ago.
I'm sorry, made what report public?
If you let me finish, I will tell you what report we made public. We told you a few weeks ago that we have information indicating Russia also has already prepositioned a group of operatives to conduct a false flag operation in eastern Ukraine. So that, Matt, to your question, is an action that Russia has already taken.
It's an action that you say that they have taken, but you have shown no evidence to confirm that. And I'm going to get to the next question here, which is, what is the evidence that they... I mean, this is like crisis actors, really? This is like Alex Jones territory you're getting into now. What evidence do you have to support the idea that there is some propaganda film in the making?
Matt, this is derived from information known to the U.S. government, intelligence information that we have declassified. I think you know...
Okay, well, where is it? Where is this information?
It is intelligence information that we have declassified.
Well, where is it? Where's the declassified information?
I just delivered it.
No, you made a series of allegations and statements.
Would you like us to print out the topper? Because you will see a transcript of this briefing that you can print out for yourself.
That's not evidence, Ned. That's you saying it. That's not evidence. I'm sorry.
What would you like, Matt?
I would like to see some proof that you you can show that
Matt, you have
that shows that the Russians are doing this. Ned, I've been doing this for a long time.
I know, that was my point. You have been doing this for quite a while. You know that when we declassify intelligence information,
right. And I
we do so in a means. We do so with an eye to protecting sources and methods.
Is not going to fall. I remember a lot of things. So where is the declassified information other than you coming out here and saying?
Matt, I'm sorry you don't like the format, but we have declassified.
It's not the format; it's the content.
I'm sorry you don't like the content. I'm sorry you are doubting the information that is in the possession of the U.S. government.
Now, it's an appropriate segue from wrestling to that, but that is embarrassing.
That was great. Where does that reporter work? Can I ask that question?
Newsweek. Matt's over at Newsweek. Yeah. Now I want to get to the other.
So we're talking about mainstream.
Mainstream. And Ned Price embarrassed the United States of America. And he's exactly right. The reporter, Matt, is exactly right. He didn't offer. You saying something over and over is not proof of something.
That's not evidence.
Proof. Right. So let's hear this other clip, though, where it really falls apart. Ned Price is lying about 2014. Let's play that, Saul.
We also know that the Russians have resorted to these tactics in the past, have developed a remarkably similar playbook in 2014, amassed troops, engaged in 2014, it is a historical fact, engaged in disinformation and propaganda to paint Ukraine as the aggressor, fabricated a pretext for an invasion, and went in. So with what we know from 8 years ago, with what we have seen, you and I both have seen, everyone has seen, with what we have heard 8 years ago, in the ensuing 8 years, and in recent weeks, it seems to me that it should not be outlandish that the Russians may be engaging in this activity.
But not
again.
Being outlandish doesn't mean that you have any proof that it's happening.
The second point,
or being planned. Ned, you can't just. All of that may very well be true. It probably is true. Okay, but it doesn't provide any evidence of what you're alleging now, which is that they're planning this fake mass casualty event with quote unquote crisis actors, which is something that, you know, in the U.S. we rarely hear outside of the kind of, you know, nutty conspiracy theory crowd.
Well, to be clear, we're not alleging what the United States is doing. This is information available to us. What the Russians are up to. I understand your point, but I just want to.
Well, no, but let me just say, the Israeli reporter beclowned himself. Ned Price was lying. That's not what happened. There was no invasion of Crimea in 2014. There was no invasion of Ukraine. There were naval troops that were already there. There was a referendum, you liar. There's a referendum, Ned, and nobody. And this gets to what you were talking about earlier, Mark Frost, the laziness. All anyone has to do is go to YouTube and look up referendum. You'll see people popping champagne in the streets, thrilled to be rejoining Russia.
But at least one reporter did his job today.
Yeah,
and by the way, it's the AP, not Newsweek.
Oh, forgive me. That I misspoke. Thanks a lot, Mark. You're correct. It was the AP, not Newsweek. Thanks a lot. Great job co-hosting, Mark Frost, because I need people to correct me when I'm wrong. Carmen Savio, always great to have you on the show. Tim Canova, great to have you on the show. Have a great weekend to Saul, to Rod, to everybody out there in the listening audience. You're listening to a great week of The Backstory.